This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com as we are getting you set for the NFL Draft with Timo Riske of Pro Football Focus breaking down their NFL Draft simulator and some props that stand out based on what that simulator says. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. Ed, the week of the draft is finally here. I am pumped to have something that actually is happening in real time to pay attention to. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I mean, this is probably the biggest week of sports in quarter two of 2020.
Oh, man.
Which is a really, really sad thing. But the draft is going to be so huge. I can't wait to see the ratings numbers of a bunch of people talking through Zoom or however the heck they're going to broadcast this thing. I think that's going to be super fascinating. And then, the debut of The Last Dance, the story of Michael Jordan, his last season with the Chicago Bulls, aired last night. It was, just giving people a chance to talk about something and just kind of get together and watch something. I thought it was fascinating in terms of the GM, Jerry Krause, who might be the most hated managerial position in all of sports, right? Like, he was the one that told them that this was their last dance. Like Phil Jackson wasn't coming back, which meant Jordan wasn't coming back. And it's kind of interesting because he wanted to show that he could do it again, right? And rebuild and build another franchise. And I think just as a human being, if you get given a lottery ticket like Michael Jordan, just be grateful and shut up. And just be grateful that you have Michael Jordan, you got all those titles, you will be associated with those titles, even if not given credit for those. And and he did put some really solid pieces around Michael Jordan, but he was gifted a lottery ticket.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I probably should. I was busy watching Westworld because I make bad decisions in my life and decided to do that instead. But Michael Jordan is a major blind spot for me because when I was growing up and paying attention to sports was when he was on the Wizards. So I haven't gone back and researched it. My biggest exposure to Michael Jordan is Space Jam. So
are you that young?
28. I mean, I'm not.
Man, I feel so
young.
old right now, Jim Saunders.
I'm not super young, but I was one of the last people who I don't think is old enough to truly appreciate Michael Jordan. I don't know enough about basketball to pound the table for LeBron James versus Michael Jordan, but I also just know that my lack of knowledge around Michael Jordan is a pretty major blind spot in my sports fandom.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Jordan was at his peak when I was a teenager and through college, and I mean, I hated him, right? I was always rooting against him and always rooting for the underdog, which just never worked out. I still think there's value in rooting for the underdog. I think in general that's a good thing, but just shows you his greatness in that, even people like me are really interested in hearing his story and how this last season unfolded.
And I think that's not a contrarian opinion either. There are a lot of people I was following on Twitter who were talking about how even though they rooted against Jordan, they were so fascinated by this documentary. And I have all the DVDs of the 30 for 30, so I need to I love documentaries. Like we said last week, I've been watching a ton of them. I need to get up on this so I can actually learn a bit because it's kind of like a crash course and a cheat code for people like me who may not have been necessarily old enough at the time to appreciate Michael Jordan. But now I can catch up, and I think that's a nice thing about this documentary series.
Yeah, absolutely, and to learn about Jordan too is interesting in that he was a 21-year-old. He was a rookie with the Bulls. He knocks on he was trying to find his teammates one night and knocks on a door, and they're all in there doing coke and weed, and there's a whole bunch of women in there. And as a 21-year-old kid, he turned around and walked out that door.
Wow.
He did not party. He was serious as a professional, and he slept and got his energy up to be the best basketball player that he could be. And I certainly wouldn't have been like that as a 21-year-old kid. I mean, that was a really interesting part of episode 1.
Yeah, I'll have to catch up on that because that sounds like a pretty fun story for sure. We're going to talk with Timo Riske of Pro Football Focus today. He is a data scientist for PFF. We're going to discuss, again, PFF's draft simulator, some props that he likes based on what he's seen in those numbers, proper draft strategy for teams, some things to try to avoid, and stuff like that. So we'll be talking with Timo in just a second. Find him on Twitter at PFF_Moo. Last week we had Matthew Holt of US Integrity on. We talked about the NFL draft and the NFL draft tool US Integrity has to compare, basically price shop for the NFL draft. Also talked an introduction to UFC betting, because it sounds like UFC may be back, and Ed, NASCAR, talking about coming back in a couple of weeks too. So we may have a time where, whether it's intelligent or not, NASCAR is back in the not terribly distant future. And like, it's weird because I have to go back and forth because I understand how dangerous, and like everyone doesn't. This is not, I understand how dangerous this virus is and how bad it could be if we open things back up too soon. But selfishly, I really freaking want to watch and bet on NASCAR. So it's like, it's hard to balance those two things out in my brain.
I mean, you should be able to social distance and have a NASCAR event. I mean, assuming there's no fans. The crew
members are where it makes me a little bit nervous. Like, they can wear masks, and they wear gloves all the time anyway. So I think it's feasible, but, like, I feel a little guilty about just really wanting NASCAR back.
I think it's okay. I think we all want society to come back, and I'm freaking out a little bit about how fast it's going to come back. Yeah, which we can maybe talk about later, but I don't feel guilty.
Okay, good. I feel better about that for sure. If you want to hear the discussion with Matthew Holt, just check out Covering the Spread wherever you listen to your podcast. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, the Google Play Store. We are there everywhere. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, please leave a rating and review as well. If you are looking for real-time betting and fantasy implications of the draft on Thursday night, you're in luck. We'll be doing a live stream right here at numberFire, breaking down each pick as they happen on FanDuel's YouTube page. It'll be me, JJ Zachariason, and Brandon Gadula analyzing the picks, live sweating prop bets with you, and answering questions you have throughout the night, talking Tua, talking all the wide receivers and the running backs and the fantasy implications. To stream that, just go to youtube.com/FanDuel videos and tune in at 8 p.m. Thursday for round 1, and then Friday night for rounds 2 and 3. Should be a whole lot of fun. So make sure you tune in for that. We'll have a post up on numberFire as well, where you can find the link there. Let's bring in Timo Riske. Find him on Twitter at PFF_Moo and break down the NFL draft and some optimal practices for teams heading into the draft as well.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Timo Riske into Covering the Spread. Timo, really appreciate you taking the time to swing by and chat for today. How are you doing?
Hi, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for having me. Always happy to talk about football, NFL, and some draft.
And you are coming to us live from Germany. And what is the coronavirus experience like over there? How have things been for you? Are you doing all right so far?
Yeah, I've been all right. Actually, basically, I mean, I don't know anyone who've had it. I mean, which is pretty nice for me. But I mean, it's obviously because of all the measurements that were taken.
Right.
So yeah, I guess it's pretty much like in the US. So only leaving the house with my wife and my kids.
Yeah, I was reading about the steps Germany had taken initially to like try to combat the spread and stuff like that. So I'm glad that things are going well for you for sure. So let's dive in here, Timo, and talk a little bit of NFL. Pro Football Focus actually has a mock draft simulator, and what it does is it allows people to simulate the draft. It includes you can make trades, you can try to jack up your score. I've tried to do my best to the Jets that I can possibly do, and hopefully better than the real world Jets. But what are some of the sources that go into predicting how things will play out and simulating things within this simulator?
Yeah, I mean, there are basically three things that go into the predictions, or that go into the probability that a certain player is selected at a certain spot. So basically, first of all, the basis is the big board. So we have a big board at PFF, which Mike Renner compiles, and we also have a public big board from grindingthemocks.com. Benjamin Robinson does a great work where he scrapes all these mock drafts from different sites, and so that's a very cool source for us. So basically, we have the PFF board, the public board, and then we can compose it like we want. I mean, we've put a few options into the simulator. You can basically 100% PFF, 100% public, or like a 50-50 blend, or some other blends. So that's the basis. So basically, players are ranked by a composed board, and then there are some other factors that has players move up the board or fall down the board, and the first factor is positional value. And the user can decide whether he wants to put emphasis on this or not. And this is basically based on two things. Well, yeah, if you leave this on, the setting, then there are two things in play. So it's basically based on our PFF raw metric from Eric Eager. So basically what I did is I just looked at the average raw and the standard deviations or the variance of raw for each position, and using these two numbers, I just created a list of positional value for each position. And obviously, quarterback is the first, and then running backs and defensive interior and interior offensive line are at the bottom. And another thing that goes into positional value, which is a little bit hidden, is Eric Eager's college to pro projection. So we have for each college prospect, his model predicts the WAR the prospect will generate through the first 4 years for his team, and this also can have a player move up a little bit or move down a little bit. But we didn't want to make this as a third board, because it might shake up things too much. As opposed to what the public board looks like. So we basically hide this feature in the positional value. So if positional value is set very high, then these college to pro projection go into the board a little bit more. And if it's set off the setting, then it doesn't factor into the board at all.
Oh yeah, and Timo, I think you were about to get into the last factor, which is the randomness associated with the draft process in general. And that's something I was really interested in. And I think it actually has a lot of betting value too, because I think there's an opportunity to play against things that we think are sure is going to happen. So for example, Joe Burrow is widely expected to be the first pick. But when we look at your numbers, you have, I think 10-15% that Tua Tagovailoa ends up being that first pick at the quarterback position. So tell us a little bit about the randomness that goes into that.
Yeah, I mean, one reason why I put in the randomness, so why I left, basically I wanted to leave me the possibility to change a little bit stuff by just pressing one button. I mean, I don't want to code everything. Don't want to change the code or something like this, just to change a little bit. So basically I created this factor so that I can only press one button and then I've changed something. And and the reason I use this is because, I mean, the probabilities are currently they are not based on a model. So it just have the big board. Then players can move up the board based on positional value. Players can move up the board based on team needs. So if a team is on the clock that needs a wide receiver or cornerback, then wide receivers move up a little bit, and cornerbacks also. And then I just have a ranking of players. And then I just put a weight on each player based on this ranking, and it's just some exponential function. So obviously the closer two players are to each other, the closer the probability that they are selected. Yeah.
So the randomness comes from this kind of exponential function that you have every time you simulate.
Yeah, basically the factor. How fast the exponential function decreases when we go down the board. This is basically the randomness factor, but obviously it's such that at the top of the draft there's less uncertainty. I mean, like Chase Young is like the second player on the board, and then we have someone like CJ Henderson who's like in the early teens or so, 12, 13, whatever. And there's we are like very sure that CJ Henderson will not be picked in front of Chase Young, because they're only 10 spots apart, but we are like almost 100% certain. I mean, maybe 99 or 99.5, whatever. 100% is not something we should say. But like at day two, when someone is like it's like 40th on the board and someone else is 50th on the board, then we are not certain at all that the guy who's 40th will be picked before the guy that is 50th. So there's much more uncertainty cooked in at day 2 or day 3, or even at the 20th pick or 25th pick. There's much more uncertainty than at the top of the draft. So basically the exponential curve becomes more steep at the top of the draft at day 2 or day 3. And plus the randomness factor can also change the shape of the curve. And basically, yeah. So basically, if you set randomness very high, then there's more uncertainty. And if you set it very low, then there's less uncertainty. And
yeah,
you
we've
can
heard
also,
a lot about how like COVID-19 has affected the certainty or the ability to predict how things are going to play out in the draft. Has that played out in your simulations too? Have you had to increase the randomness as a way to react to the limited information and intel that we have around this draft?
Not really, because I think it's already relatively randomized. I've already heard some complaints. Obviously, like I played the simulator and Chase Young dropped to number 5. How is this possible? So I think there's already more cooked in than a lot of people would think. But on the other hand, there's so much randomness in the draft. Stuff happens all the time. Who would have thought that Clarence Farrell goes like 4th overall last year, or that Hakeem Butler or drops out of the, I don't know where he was picked, like
I think
beyond
it's the
100.
round.
Yeah, 120 or whatever. So there's so much randomness into the in the draft. So I wanted to make sure to also cook randomness in the simulator. And if someone is not fine with it, you can just change the setting and go with less randomness.
Excellent. Do you feel like the randomness of the draft, does that give you an approach to perhaps betting on some of these draft props?
I think one thing which might be particularly true this year is what you don't want to do, I guess, when you bet on an under, you don't want to have a bet where you are basically dependent on 1 or 2 GMs doing what you think they would do, because we might know less than we ever knew about what teams think about the players, and maybe even the teams don't really know what they think about the players. So I looked at some props, and what popped to my mind is like Justin Jefferson at 21.5. So for me this looks like, okay, if you bet the under, you're basically saying that you know what Howie Roseman from the Eagles will do, but who knows what Howie Roseman from the. So this is like a prop where I would stay away from the under, because it's basically you don't hatch it with a lot of GMs. As a contrast to that, I looked at the Christian Fulton bet, and I think that the public has him falling to the end of the first round, and his prop is, I think, 25.5. But if you look at the board, there are a lot of teams. So basically, I think the consensus is pretty much Okudah is the best cornerback. Then there's Henderson, who will probably go somewhere between 10 and 15. But then there is I don't think there's really a consensus on who's the next cornerback. Christian Fulton, Trevon Diggs, and Jeff Gladney, some names. But there are a lot of teams between 15 with the Denver Broncos and 25, which is the Minnesota Vikings. I think there are a lot of teams who need cornerbacks. So, so you have a better chance there because you're just hedging with more GMs. So you don't really have to know what this one GM will do. It just takes one GM who thinks, okay, Christian Fulton is the next in the line of the top cornerbacks. So I'd like this more
flexibility.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Now, let's talk a little bit about the draft from a real-world perspective. We'll get back to the betting aspect as well, but the draft simulator on PFF gives you a score for each draft that you do at the end based on the trades you make and the value you get from each pick. And if we're talking about the real NFL, how can teams maximize the value they're getting during the draft? You talk about positional value a bit, but are there other things teams can do in order to maximize what they're getting from their draft class?
So the first thing actually already starts before the draft. For example, it's free agency. So you should never go into the draft with a blatant hole. which basically forces you to pick a certain player or to pick a certain position early in the draft. Because there are three problems. First of all, you can never be sure that you will get a certain player. This is basically what happened to the Texans last year. They were probably targeting Andrew Dillard, but then the Eagles jumped them and they reached for Titus Howard, I guess. But they weren't comfortable, obviously, with the offensive line room, so they had to give up 2 first-round picks and for Laramie Tunsil on a franchise tag or 5th-year options. So that's not ideal, obviously. And the other problem is, and this is something I wrote about this offseason, is obviously even if you get a certain player, you don't know whether he will be good. So the expectation is always that you find a starter in the first round, but often you do not. And the next problem is, even if he is good, that's where I wrote about, he probably won't be that good during his rookie year. So players generally only generate 60% of the raw they generate in later seasons. In their rookie season, so they don't produce as much as they produce later in their careers, or even in the second year, third year. So if you draft to fill an immediate need for the next season, you probably won't be happy with it. I mean, you can get lucky, but you might not get lucky, and then you have a problem. So that's one thing.
No, that makes a ton of sense from the team perspective, right? Not even, that these guys take a while to develop and they're not going to necessarily plug a hole. Timo, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about the quarterback position. There's a lot of rumors swirling around Tua Tagovailoa and where he might go in this draft. His draft position is all the way up to 4.5 right now, with plus 180 on the under. Based on what you're seeing with your simulations, new data that's coming in with grinding the mocks, is there any temptation to make a bet here on this 4.5?
I think at FanDuel it's already at 5.5, which is not good for betting proposals, I guess. Because if it's at 4.5, you can say okay, let's pick the over and say, the Dolphins don't feel comfortable trading up for him, but they might trade him, they might draft him if he falls to them. But that's out of play now, I guess, because it's at 5.5. So that's pretty much what I talked about earlier. So you are basically, So you basically have to ask yourself what the Dolphins will think. But I have no idea what the Dolphins would think. I would, if I were the Dolphins, I would draft Tua at 5 if he falls to me. Right. I would not. I would draft Tua over Justin Herbert. But,
would that be a pretty easy decision for you, Timo? If you were the Dolphins, would it be pretty easy for you to go Tua over Herbert if you were in that spot?
Yeah, I think it would be pretty easy for me because from an accuracy standpoint, he is just better than Herbert, and this is a trade that usually translates from college to NFL very well. And I'm not an expert in quarterback scouting, obviously, but what other people whom I trust told me is that also from a processing standpoint, he's just the better prospect.
Right.
So, and if you draft a quarterback, you hope to get it for obviously for the rookie contract, but also to give him a second contract, to have him for the next 10 years. And so I'd rather bet on the injury not being a long-term problem than using really high draft pick for a quarterback that I don't really like from an accuracy standpoint.
So, Timo, I really like what you said earlier about you never want to make a bet about what one particular GM is thinking. But is it a little bit different here just because we have heard things about the Chargers maybe trading up to get the number 3 pick and drafting Tua? Does that change your mind? Does that change your mind about this prop?
What I can remember in recent drafts is that if we heard late rumors about quarterbacks, they were often true. I mean, so Baker Mayfield, I think we started hearing the rumors that he would go first overall like 2 days or even 1 day before the draft.
Right.
And obviously it turned out correct. Now we are hearing that Tua might be falling and might actually going below Justin Herbert. So I'm tempted to believe that, even if I would not decide it this way. So I'd probably stay away from the under, even if it's 5.5 now.
Yeah, makes sense, especially when it's so consistent, the drumbeat that Tua may slip as well. Let's talk about another quarterback here in Jordan Love. He, I believe, opened at 14.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. That's now 19.5, and it's up to minus 200 on the over for that number. So the sentiment on Jordan Love, initially very positive, but has swung a lot against him, potentially partially because, the prospect, but also because of the way the draft plays out with where teams who need quarterbacks are picking. Do you think that slide is appropriate, or are you still looking to snag the over on Jordan Love, even with it being all the way up to 19.5?
Yeah, I'd probably still take the over. I'm not really buying the hype, and I'm not sure the NFL teams do either. Because I think in Peter King's column today, he said he tried to check who would draft Jordan Love, and he didn't find a team. And then he said the most likely teams to draft him in the second round are the Packers, who draft at the end of the second round, and I think also the Steelers, who have the first pick, somewhere in the middle of the second round, I guess. So I'm not really buying the hype. And after seeing Dwayne Haskins slip to 15 last year, teams were not really interested in him. I can't really see how teams will be that interested in Jordan Love after Burrow, Herbert, and Tua. I don't really see it.
Yeah.
Might be wrong though.
And I think that the point you made too about Dwayne Haskins last year is pertinent, because it wasn't just Dwayne Haskins, but also Drew Lock. And there's a decent amount of overlap between Drew Lock and Jordan Love, where they have big arms, they're kind of erratic, decent athleticism, but Drew Lock fell all the way to the second round. So I think that what you're saying about looking at what's happened in the past is really pertinent with guys like Jordan Love. So I think that I'd side with you there as well on skewing towards the over with Jordan Love. But I think that's a good way to put it as well.
Yes.
Any other draft props stand out to you right now, Timo, based on where the numbers currently sit at FanDuel Sportsbook?
I think I've already talked about the Christian Fulton run. I love that a lot. Another run which I would love, but I think it's a little bit risky, is the Henry Ruggs prop. It's at, where is it? It's at 13.5 right now. So I'd lean the under there, actually, because there was a lot of, so 13 is the 49ers, and the Raiders are at 12, the Jets are at 11. There are a lot of teams who need wide receivers in this range, and teams just love the speed, I guess. John Ross was picked 7th overall. Obviously, he didn't pan out, but and I think even before the combine, Henry Ruggs was seen as a much better prospect than John Ross was seen in 2017. And then running a 4.22 or 2.4, propelled him to the 7th overall pick. And so Henry Ruggs was much better, considered to be much better before the combine. Then he also ran a 4.2. So I guess teams just love the speed. Yeah. And he's also a good receiver. So I guess he'll go 13 or earlier.
And I think that Henry Ruggs is super interesting, because I know that when Pro Football Focus did their analytics mock draft, he went super high. I believe he went 4 to the Giants in that. And the WAR projections seem pretty bullish on Henry Ruggs, even though he didn't get a ton of usage in college. Is that because of all the things that speed can provide on the field? Is that what jacks up the WAR projection for a guy like Henry Ruggs?
It's a combination of obviously of his combine results. I mean, this obviously goes into the model, and it helps him a bit. I mean, much more goes into the model, but this definitely helps him a bit. What also helps him, like compared to Jerry Jeudy, is that he's projected to play more snaps outside compared to the slot, especially compared to Jerry Jeudy, and this bumps him up a little bit in the projections, because it often also yields a higher average depth of target, which is generally more valuable. So basically these are the things.
Makes a lot of sense. And he should be a fun player to
bump
watch
him up
too.
A little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is Timo Riske. Timo, really appreciate you swinging by and talking about the NFL draft. I'm looking forward to doing a couple more mocks in the simulator after work for today. It's been a fun little experiment for sure. Really enjoying it myself. Good luck to you. Enjoy the draft. And hopefully we can talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. And let's see how the draft plays out.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Timo Riske for swinging on by and breaking down the NFL draft. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Moo and check out that Pro Football Focus draft simulator. Just go to PFF.com. Like I said, it's pretty fun to play around with. I have not drafted Henry Ruggs yet in my drafts I've done for the Jets. I probably will go through and do some for the Vikings too, because they're kind of like a secondary favorite team for me. But I think Ruggs is just he's a fascinating player, because it's not often you find guys with speed who actually get some sort of usage as a receiver as well.
Yeah, and this is not the first time I've heard people talking about Ruggs as the first receiver off the board. And when you look at FanDuel, the draft position of Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, and Henry Ruggs, I mean, it's 12.5, 12.5, 13.5, right? So it's all really tight. I think there's a lot of chance for, that definitely implies that, Ruggs could certainly be not the favorite to be the first wide receiver on the board, but certainly could be. And teams definitely love the speed. So I think that was a really interesting insight.
Yeah, Ruggs is fascinating because he's one of the players, I think, who has the biggest discrepancy between his real-world value and his fantasy value, because I follow a lot of fantasy people, and they're down on Ruggs because he doesn't get a lot of usage, and that's a big predictor of who gets usage in the NFL is if you get usage in college, and he doesn't get that. But I think last year we probably saw how important speed is in the NFL with the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl, with the Eagles' offense. They made the playoffs, but they essentially collapsed after Deshaun Jackson got hurt. We saw the splits with the Texans and Will Fuller. So I think that Ruggs' real-world value is so wildly different from his fantasy value that he's a super fascinating prospect to study. But also, like you said, he's plus 460 to be the first wide receiver off the board. And we heard Timo reference Peter King's mock today. He did not have Henry Ruggs going as the first wide receiver. He had CeeDee Lamb going, and he said that Mike Mayock loves CeeDee Lamb, but we heard Timo reference that Clelin Ferrell move last year. Nobody knew what the Raiders were going to do outside of the Josh Jacobs pick. So I think that anything we hear about the Raiders being certain on one prospect, we should take with a pretty big grain of salt because of how big of a wild card they were last year. So maybe John Gruden, old school Al Davis type pick, just go Henry Ruggs, get that speed plus 460. I don't think that's that bad. And it also plays into Ed, too, another thing we talked about, where maybe you want to shoot on for some long shots in a draft where we kind of don't know how things are going to play out.
Oh, we never know how things are going to play out in the draft. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting betting opportunity to kind of bank on some uncertainty and some unexpectedness. I think that's more likely the deeper in the draft you go. We probably know who the first pick is going to be, probably know who the second pick is going to be. But as I want to talk about, it kind of drops off after that.
And we'll get into that in just 1 second. But first, if you think you know the NFL Draft's top 10 picks and how they're going to shake out, now's your chance to prove it with FanDuel's Draft Challenge Free Play. It is simple. Just pick players based on how you think the draft is going to happen. You will earn points if you pick the player in the correct slot or if the player is drafted within one slot of your prediction. Finish with the most points and win your share of $10,000. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. There is another free play game as well on FanDuel, where you can pick who will be the first player at each position, which may be relevant for your discussion here, Ed. Talking about that number 3 overall pick, What do you see going down there, and how does that pertain to betting?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of things going on there. But just to reiterate, like, I mean, I think there's an opportunity to bet on uncertainty. And, we asked Timo about, their simulator has Burrow only at about 85-ish% chance of being the first pick. And okay, given the rumors, I mean, the guy that fills that probability in is Tua Tagovailoa. Given the rumors, I'm not exactly going to make that bet right now. Chase Young, the second pick. But number 3, I think, is really interesting. And I had Evan Silva on my podcast, and he basically said, you have to throw out reason when you talk about predicting what the Lions are going to do. So I think the kind of safe, the kind of middle choice to do is to pick Jeffrey Okudah. He's going to be he's the cornerback from Ohio State. A lot of mock drafts have him there, and I think there's about even odds at FanDuel. And this is kind of the safe choice for the franchise. Cornerback is a position with not a huge supply, so that would be the good thing. And also what Grinding the Mocks would say is, like, it's pretty close between him and I forget who was, maybe it was Herbert that was next, that would be that third pick. But you never know. So for the Lions, like, the bad choice is to pick Derek Brown, the defensive tackle out of Auburn. And it's not bad because Derek Brown's not a good player. But it's more just the positional value of picking a defensive tackle there. It would not be the best choice, but it's looking like something that might happen. Evan Silva still has Derek Brown at that pick in his mock draft. He talked about how at one point FanDuel had that choice at 29-1. It is 6-1 right now. So not likely to happen, but certainly not out of the question. And who knows what's going to happen before draft time. So I think that's the bad outcome. We kind of talked about the safe outcome with Okudah. And then there's the great outcome that they could actually trade down. I think a lot of people would like to get a quarterback with that position. The Chargers have definitely been put in that position, in that number of teams that want to draft a quarterback pretty high in this draft. So Okudah's, pretty much even money right now. And then Tua is plus 400. Justin Herbert's plus 450. I think there's a lot of value at that third pick right now to kind of bet on chaos. And basically the Lions are someone going against kind of the consensus that Okudah is going to be that third pick.
Yeah, and I think the Derek Brown one is interesting too, because I was listening to Evan on his podcast. He's established the Run podcast with Adam Levitan, and they were talking about how when you look at the rankings of NFL insiders, they tend to be higher on someone like Derek Brown than people who are maybe less connected but are trying to judge things based on talent. Because I think that's very interesting, because that's where you can find some longer value. Because it doesn't matter what we think. No one cares what we think. It only matters what the NFL thinks. And thus, we want to look at guys who are connected, like Gil Brandt is a guy they were talking about a lot, who had Derek Brown pretty high in his ranking. So I think trying to spot guys like that and maybe get them as longer shots. But also, I think the point about Jeff Okudah is correct, because you don't want to bet that at plus 110, given we can't expect rational decisions from the Lions. We don't know if they're going to trade out. And it's just, I think that number is too short to feel really good about it based on, I think that, like you said, the uncertainty really beginning with that pick. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just the perfect team there to see the uncertainty.
Exactly. Of course. Matt Patricia, still in volatility, as always.
I mean, we could, I guess, we could throw the Raiders in there. That might be a good team to have a volatile type pick. Who else? I don't know.
I think those would be the top two I would think of. Like, the Browns get, ridicule, but they're predictable. So, I think if I were to go with wild, Lions and Raiders would probably be at the top of my list there for sure. Now, you were talking about Derek Brown not being the optimal choice because of positional value. I want to talk about positional value too and talk about another prop here, because we've seen a lot of discussion about DeAndre Swift and potentially Jonathan Taylor going in the first round, and a couple of teams picking toward the back end of the round have some level of need at that position. So it makes sense we would discuss those guys in the first round, but we can get plus 150 juice on there being 0 running backs drafted in the first round. And I like this bet at that specific number. And a big part of the reason here is the specific teams that have a need at running back. I would list the Dolphins and the Chiefs in that department. I wouldn't list the Chiefs personally, but people think they are. The Seahawks are another team that have been rumored to be targeting a running back. But all three of those teams have question marks about what they'll do. The Dolphins seem to be, I think, an analytically run organization, and they have a lot of holes to fill. So running back, to me, kind of a hard sell for them. If we look at the Seahawks and the Chiefs, they're both prime trade down candidates. The Seahawks always, it seems like, want to trade down and collect picks. That's kind of been their motto in the NFL draft. And I also would not list personally running back at the top end of their needs because they could still use a tackle. They could still use an edge rusher, defensive lineman, stuff like that. So running back, I think, is more of a later round thing for them. Whereas the Chiefs only have 5 picks in the draft, and they have no cap room. So, buddy, they got to trade down and add more picks. They've just got 5 right now. If they trade down, they can recoup some of that draft stock. If they stick with just the 5 picks, I think they've got too many needs to go at the running back. So it's really confusing to me to see them always tied to guys like DeAndre Swift because Damian Williams is pretty good. They could very easily just stand pat there. They just signed DeAndre Washington as well. So I think that when you look at these teams at the back end of the first round, I think that we're going to see a lot of them trade out, but also the teams that do trade with them into the first round probably aren't going to target a running back. They're probably going to want that 5th-year option tied to maybe a guy like Jordan Love, maybe an offensive tackle or something like that. The 5th-year option not as valuable at running back as it is other positions. So while I think that Swift and Taylor will likely go somewhere decently early, probably at the front of the second round, I don't think they will get into the first round. So getting plus 150 on that one makes it a pretty fun bet in my eyes. So I'm going to go with under 0.5 running backs in the first round at plus 150. Ed, what about you? You think the NFL is rational enough to hold off on their desires?
I think it's laughable that the Seahawks would be targeting a running back. Obviously, this is a team that has decided that they're going to emphasize the run and they're going to run the ball, and they certainly have over the past 2 years. I mean, they do still have Chris Carson. They do have a lot of assets there. Pete Carroll is the one that's been driving this train about needing to run the ball, and he and Jerry Krause are ones that should be very happy that they got the lottery ticket, obviously, in Pete Carroll's case, being the quarterback, Russell Wilson. And as for the Chiefs, if the Chiefs don't draft a cornerback, they're dumb. They need help in that secondary. Like, why would you get a running back? Why? Yeah. That makes no sense at all.
It also goes against what Andy Reid has always done. He's been with the Chiefs since, I think, like 2011. They've not picked a running back within the first 2 rounds any of those drafts. That's almost 10 drafts now. 0 running backs within the first 2 rounds. And part of that's because they had Jamal Charles for a while, but like they had the same running back depth chart last year entering the draft that they have now, essentially, and they didn't pick a running back at the 6th round. Why would they change that now, especially when you have just 5 picks? So I guess what I'm doing here, Ed, is I'm putting faith in Andy Reid, and we're not going to trust the Lions, but I'm going to trust Andy Reid as far as making good decisions in the NFL draft. I feel better about that one.
Yeah, for sure. I can't see Kansas City taking a running back. That's like if you have plus 150 and you get to the 32nd pick, you're probably pretty good.
Exactly. Until the Seahawks trade back in and take a running back there, because why not, man? Why not? Let's close up here with Quarantine Corner for this week. Things we are doing to occupy our time in this shelter-in-place era that we have. Ed, what are you doing to pass the time nowadays?
A couple of things. I actually watched the Dave Chappelle when he got the Mark Twain Prize. This happened last year. It's really awesome. I love Dave Chappelle. Equanimity is, as I talked about last week, the best comedy special in my mind, just because it is not only hilarious, but also profound. And yeah, so check that out. I watched it with my wife. Neil Brennan, who was the guy who co-wrote Chappelle Show with him. I mean, his bit was so good. It was so good. Also, another thing we've been watching was Onward. It was a movie, a Pixar movie that was out in the theaters when this pandemic hit. So they released it on Disney Plus. Beautiful little story about 2 brothers. Watched it with my 2 boys, who of course immediately started fighting right after the movie ended. But yeah, it was a really nice story. A little unexpected ending. So yeah, definitely hitting the Netflix and the Disney Plus, and I would recommend both of those things.
That one is interesting because it's two actors who I like a lot in real life, and Chris Pratt and Tom Holland, and these super talented dudes, but then doing voice acting.
Yeah.
And at least based on the trailers, it sounded like they were pretty good at it, which I guess shouldn't surprise me. But those are two very distinct talents, but they seemed like they were doing well with it. So I thought that was very interesting.
I think the role of Chris Pratt as the bigger brother is just perfect.
Yeah.
I feel like that is just kind of his personality, and that was great. I mean, Tom Holland was great too.
Yeah.
But it was really good. I mean, they do some amazing stuff at Pixar, and it's nice. It's just nice that they put that on Disney Plus instead of trying to get you to pay $19.99 on another service to buy the movie.
Yeah.
Right? I want to watch Rise of Skywalker again, but I am not paying $20 to watch it again.
Oh, that's still at $20.
I think I haven't seen it on Disney Plus yet.
Okay.
So
that's a lot.
And I do want to watch it because I like the Star Wars series. I thought that movie was disappointing. I will pay $2.99 to watch it again. Yeah. But I'm not paying $19.99.
Yeah. I think we'll eventually probably get to Onward, but I still need to watch Toy Story 4, which is on Disney Plus now. Toy Story, I think, was one of the first movies I ever saw in theater, or at least ever willingly saw. The first one I saw was a Batman movie that I left halfway through because I was 3 and hated it. But I think the first one that I wanted to see was Toy Story, so I think I need to round things out here and watch Toy Story 4. But then eventually we'll get around. I guess Frozen 2 is on there too, and should probably watch that because the first one was good.
Yeah.
I got to catch up still.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Toy Story, that first Toy Story is really interesting because that might have changed the course of the world in the sense that was Steve Jobs' first hit after he got fired from Apple the first time.
Yeah.
And so if he doesn't have that hit,
interesting.
What happens with Apple, and does he ever become the Steve Jobs that, who knows?
Huh. I never thought about that. That's very interesting. For my quarantine corner for this week, I want to talk about playing trivia because my fiance and I have been playing bar trivia for a while. Back when we lived in Boston, I guess Somerville or Cambridge technically, but we go to Ginger Exchange, rest in peace, because it's now closed down. But we'd go to trivia with her roommates, and they live in Minneapolis now, so we haven't gotten to play trivia with them for a while. But because of the quarantines, we've actually been able to start playing trivia again, except playing it online. And there are a lot of bar trivia type companies that are now doing Twitch streams and Facebook lives of trivia, and they will post those. You can do them live, or they will post them after the fact online. The company we've been doing is Geeks Who Drink, which is I think based in Boston. That's a company we I guess that's not the one we went to when we were in Boston, but I think they're a nationwide company. But you can go to, if you just search for Geeks Who Drink, they have a website. They post their Twitch streams up on there, and it's kind of nice. You don't have the competitive aspect, obviously, because they can't make sure that you are not cheating. But it's fun to just kind of answer some questions, hang out with people, and play a little bit of trivia. Shockingly, Ed, this has not made us better at trivia, which is upsetting. But it's still pretty fun. Have you ever been a trivia type person for bars or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, back before I had kids, definitely would head out and do some trivia. But I think it is interesting, these things that are kind of coming back into people's lives because of the pandemic. We used to have a poker game in Ann Arbor 4 or 5 years, and then my buddy who hosted it started a brewery and just didn't have time to do it anymore. And that's Holmes Brewery, which makes awesome beer. But now, with the pandemic, we've started to do a few games here and there, just playing online, getting people on Zoom, which has been nice to see people. So there are some opportunities to, do some things that you otherwise wouldn't do. And I think those are always interesting and hopefully good for the soul. Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun, honestly. So I'm kind of hoping that it's something that sticks around after this is all wrapped up, and which could be a while, but it's been nice to play a little bit of trivia again, connect with people who are living elsewhere, But I think it's been a fun experience for sure. That is all that we have for today here on Covering the Spread in our final episode before the NFL draft comes up this week. We'll be back next week to recap it all and talk about, we'll finally do a Covering the Past for the first time in like a decade, it feels like. So we've had nothing to recap, but finally we'll have draft picks to talk about so we can discuss that there. Make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread to get that right when it is posted. Big thank you once again to Timo Riske for swinging by. Find him on Twitter at PFF_Moo. Once again, he is a data scientist for Pro Football Focus, and check out that draft simulator. Ed, what's going on with you over at the Power Rank and the Football Analytics Show?
Yeah, I had Evan Silva on the Football Analytics Show. Evan's obviously a monster in terms of NFL knowledge. His mock drafts are awesome. So, yeah, definitely go check that out. And, I think that's about it. Just getting ready for the draft. I haven't been on Twitter much recently, but I certainly will be on there Thursday night because it's going to be fun to kind of hang out and see what everyone's up to. And hope my internet connection's not that slow, so we can be following it live.
Yeah, we haven't had an event to live tweet together in a while, so this will be a fun experience for sure. And if you're going to talk to anyone about the NFL draft, Evan Silva's perfect because he just consumes so much information, and that's exactly what you want to do this time of year. So make sure you check out the Football Analytics Show for that. I am at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. As mentioned, we have that live stream coming up on Thursday night with me, JJ, and Brandon, 8 p.m., youtube.com/FanDuel videos. I will be live sweating props there. JJ and Brandon will be giving projections based on where players go. I'll get to geek out about the offensive line. We'll get to talk Tua and everything else. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page and check that out on Thursday night. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for keeping the video side of things here kept up as always. Thank you, Cal, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. We hope you are staying safe and staying healthy out there, and hopefully you enjoy the NFL Draft. We'll talk to you again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.